Hey folks, just wanted to show you this new book I got kind of excited about. It's called Hedgerow. It's by Eric Thomas, John T. White, originally published in 1980. When I saw that, it didn't occur to me that that means this book is 40 years old. Not an old book as books go, but definitely makes me feel old to realize that a book born in 1980 is 40 years old. Not that much older than I am. I got this because I'd been listening to The Sproutlands by William Bryant Logan on Audible and becoming fascinated with the idea of a sustainable and renewable microclimate, microenvironment created by man using and in cooperation with nature. So I found this on Amazon, and most of the edition, it's been out of print for a while, most of the options for buying it were in the $50 to $70 range. But I found this one in England that was only about 12 bucks. Apparently when it was first printed it was only £4.95, whatever 95 is in British money. I actually don't know what that means. So open it. It has that lovely old book smell. It smells like the bottom of a library basement, like it's been sitting in somebody's collection in the dark, kind of musting for a while. All of it is beautiful, hand-drawn, hand-painted illustrations, talking about the hedge, how it developed in England, its place in its maintenance, its place in the English climate and the ecosystems that it created. I'm super excited to read it, so I'll just give you the aphorism and the one paragraph off the first page. Lost in such ecstasies in this old spot, I feel that rapture which the world hath not, that joy like health that flushes in my face amid the brambles of this ancient place. John Clare. When a familiar landmark is threatened, we learn to cherish it often too late. Researchers are now studying the hedgerow, assessing its importance to farming as well as to the flora and fauna that have made it their home. As an historical record and as a nature reserve, there is little dispute that the hedgerow provides the best possible statement of the balance which exists between the work of man and his natural environment. So, Hedgerow by Eric Thomas, John T. White. I'm going to start reading it. Can't wait to see what it's all about. I'll let you know what I think. All right. So, just finished this book, Hedgerow by Eric Thomas and John T. White. Very quick read. About 2 mugs of tea will do you to get through it. It follows the history of a hedge in England from its earliest beginnings prior to the Anglo-Saxon period through the Norman Anglo-Saxon farmers, the dead hedge made with hawthorn and hazel hurdles, to the living hedge usually of living hawthorn, through the medieval hedge of after the Norman conquest, on through Tudor England and the beginning of the enclosures. There's a page on the hedge during the Black Death, which is quite depressing. And then following that, the Tudor and the enclosures, the place of the hedge in Victorian England, and then a brief touch on the hedge in the Industrial Revolution and beyond, and in the modern world. It's a fascinating book. It's beautifully illustrated throughout, written with reverence and not a little nostalgia. And as we all know, nostalgia is a hell of a drug. And nevertheless, it makes me want to go build a hedge. Actually, it talks about how the hedge was a multifunctional piece of the land was not just a barrier or a boundary. It was also a source of medicine, a source of food. It was a habitat for hundreds of species of bird, hundreds of species of insect, lots of small mammals, and the fox, the hare, the stoat, the rabbit, reptiles, you name it. It was a habitat for all of these. And the biodiversity of, they don't use the term biodiversity. I think that this book predates the popularity of that term, but the biodiversity of the hedge is quite amazing for what it does, for the small amount of area that it takes up. Because it's a narrow strip of woodland, carefully maintained, it gets more sunlight and more rain than the deep forest does, and yet has, for the smaller animals, all of the advantages of woodland, of a thicket. And so it's a great place for all these flower and plant species. Hi, baby boy. It's a great place for all these flower and plant species and their corresponding insects and mammals and vertebrates to grow. And there's beautiful illustrations of the different plants, the food plants for humans. We have hazel and wild rose and hawthorn, crab apples, blackthorns, hops. You gotta have hops. And then it follows through, after Tudor England, we get into the, not really a deep discussion of it, but it mentions the history of the enclosures when the common land was essentially seized and turned into private land in the 18th century, which I need to do more reading about. The more I hear about the enclosures, the more I'm fascinated by the history and its effects on the population of England and consequently of England's place in the world and the political and social systems that came out of England after the 18th century. So at this point, you suddenly see a massive influx of these young hedges growing up side by side with the ancient hedges. And then 200 years later, after the Industrial Revolution, the hedges are basically just torn down. They're bulldozed over because they're in the way of large-scale agriculture, because the farmers think of them as a source of pests or weeds that they then have to spray, and not realizing that they're also the source of the pests' natural predators. So yes, it does hold it is a reservoir for bugs that eat the wheat and the vegetables. It's also a reservoir for the birds that eat those bugs. So there's a massive turn from greater biodiversity and greater reservoir of life to a monoculture and an agriculture that's rotating around one or two main crops. And we'll talk more about that in other videos. But I finished the book, and at the very back of it, the very end of it, there's a step-by-step guide, very brief, but a step-by-step guide to laying your own hedge in the traditional manner. And may be surprising, but I actually really want to lay a hedge now. So one of these years we'll go ahead and we'll buy some property, 5-10 acres or so, and we'll try and plant a hedge and see how that goes. Maybe if it lasts long enough, it'll become a little habitat for all kinds of birds and insects and useful and delicious and beautiful things. Maybe it'll be an example of how people can work with the natural world instead of always trying to fight against it and overcome it. Yeah, interesting to me. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend it. Talk to you later.